Shani Warren, 1987, Taplow. She left for one errand and ended up in a lake. There are mysteries that begin with danger, and there are mysteries that begin with routine. The second kind can be harder to understand because nothing about the first moments seems to warn anyone. A young woman leaves home. A car pulls away from a quiet street. She expects to return soon. By the next evening, her body is found in a lake, bound, gagged, and surrounded by questions that will last for decades. In April of 1987, Shani Warren was living in Stoke Poges, Buckinghamshire, a quiet area not far from Slough and Maidenhead. She was 26 years old, worked as a secretary at a company called Microscope in Maidenhead, and shared a house in Neville Close with other young women. The house was owned by her parents, who also rented rooms there. To the people around her, Shani was not a recluse or someone cut off from the world. She had friends, went out socially, and was later described by her brother Stephen as a bright force in the family, full of energy, hope, and positivity. Like many people in their 20s, Shani had personal worries. Court reports later described relationship troubles, dissatisfaction with her job, and moments when friends thought she could become anxious. But her doctors were clear about one point that would later matter deeply. They had not seen her as suicidal. One doctor remembered her as a normal, healthy young woman. Another said he never saw anything that suggested she could take her own life. Those statements would become part of a much larger argument over what really happened at Taplow Lake. The day everything changed was Good Friday, April 17, 1987. Shani had been doing ordinary chores outside her home. She cut the grass and loaded the cuttings into bags, placing them in the boot of her black Vauxhall Cavalier. She was believed to be taking the grass cuttings away, reportedly to dispose of them at her parents' home. She also had simple errands connected to the Easter weekend. According to her brother, she planned to get food and buy a card and an Easter egg for an ex-boyfriend. She was expected back soon. That detail gives the case its first unsettling edge. Shani did not appear to be leaving for an uncertain journey. She had immediate plans, small purchases, and family connections ahead of her. Witnesses later recalled that Shani left her Stoke Poges home alone sometime around 6:30 that evening. One of the young women living in the house, Catherine Whitehouse, believed Shani was going out to buy Indian food and would return shortly. At that stage, nothing about the situation seemed alarming. When Shani did not come back after several hours, the concern was not instant. In 1987, there were no mobile phones to check, no text messages, no quick way to confirm if someone had changed plans. Shani was independent, social, and known to go out. Catherine Whitehouse later said she did not think it strange that Shani had not returned, because Shani was that sort of girl. It was the kind of explanation that could make sense for a few hours. But somewhere after Shani left Neville Close, the ordinary evening broke away from its expected path. The next day, Saturday, April 18th, a woman named Marjorie Arnold was walking her German Shepherd near Taplow Lake. The dog became interested in something by the water. At first, it may have looked like debris, an object at the edge of the lake, something the dog had simply noticed. Then Marjorie looked closer and saw a woman lying face down in the water. It was Shani Warren. Police arrived and began examining the area around the lake. Shani's black Vauxhall Cavalier was nearby, parked in a lay-by close to the water. One of the car doors was reportedly not fully closed. The driver's seat had been pushed back and reclined. Personal items were found inside and around the vehicle, including items connected to her plans and errands that evening. The bags that had held grass cuttings were empty. Her car keys were missing. The condition of Shani's body made the scene deeply disturbing. Her wrists had been tied with a car jump lead. Her ankles were bound with a tow rope. She had been gagged. Another jump lead was later found in the lake and had been used around her neck. The cause of death was drowning. From the outside, the scene seemed to show a violent attack, but the first direction of the case would become one of its most criticized chapters. At first, investigators considered whether Shani had taken her own life. That theory rested on early interpretations of the scene and the first post-mortem findings. The pathologist found drowning as the cause of death and did not initially identify clear evidence of a struggle. There was also an early suggestion that Shani had tied herself. For her family, and for many who later reviewed the case, that theory was almost impossible to accept. She had been making plans, carrying gifts and personal items, and expecting to return home. Her doctors had not considered her suicidal. Then there was the question of the bindings themselves. A later examination brought a different picture. Further findings included bruising and evidence pointing towards sexual assault. Expert opinion also challenged the idea that Shani could have tied the knots herself. Only after these developments did the investigation move firmly toward murder. By then, precious time had passed, and the early uncertainty had already shaped the way the case was handled. The inquest eventually returned an open verdict. For Shani's family, that meant no clear legal conclusion about how she died. It left them trapped between grief and doubt, forced to live with a case that seemed to contain obvious signs of violence, but no confirmed killer. The public began to know Shani by a haunting phrase, the Lady in the Lake. But behind that name was a daughter, a sister, and a young woman whose life had been reduced to speculation. Police appealed for information, and the case was later reconstructed on Crime Watch. Investigators wanted to know who had seen Shani's car near Taplow Lake. Some witnesses remembered a black car in the lay-by. A truck driver reported parking behind Shani's car in the early hours and noticing that one of the doors was not properly closed. He thought the car may have broken down. Other accounts mentioned a black car with the bonnet open, a blonde woman nearby, and several men looking under the bonnet. Those men were never identified. That raised one of the most important questions in the case. Had Shani's car genuinely broken down, leaving her vulnerable in the lay-by? Had someone stopped under the appearance of helping her, or had the scene been arranged to create the impression of a breakdown? The location itself made answers difficult. The lay-by was used by passing drivers and truckers. People could stop briefly, leave, and disappear into the flow of traffic. A dangerous encounter there could have happened quickly without drawing lasting attention. Over the years, investigators examined possible suspects. One name that surfaced was Clive Barwell, a convicted serial sex offender who had worked as a truck driver and was believed to have been in the area around the time of Shani's death. Police saw similarities between his crimes and elements of Shani's case, but suspicion could not replace evidence. No firm link proved he murdered Shani. The case remained cold. There were also attempts to connect Shani's death to wider speculation surrounding GEC Marconi and defense industry deaths of the 1980s, because her employer had been discussed in relation to that world. No reliable evidence proved such a connection to her murder. For a fact-based account, that theory belongs only at the margins as an example of the uncertainty that surrounded the case before forensic science finally gave investigators something stronger than rumor. For more than 30 decades, Shani's family lived with the consequences of that uncertainty. Her parents died in 2021 before seeing a conviction. Her aunt Mavis Caney later said Shani's parents were gone and that for Shani's brothers, having the case resurface again and again was deeply difficult. The early handling of the investigation, especially the idea that Shani might have taken her own life, added another wound to an already devastating loss. Then the case changed. Cold case investigators reviewed evidence using modern forensic techniques that had not been available in 1987. Items from the original investigation were re-examined, including the mouth gag. This time, forensic testing found DNA evidence. The traces were linked to Donald Robertson, a convicted sex offender from Slough. Robertson's history made the discovery even chilling. In July of 1981, a 16-year-old girl was kidnapped and raped in Slough. Robertson had been questioned at the time, but police did not have enough evidence to charge him. Days later, he raped a 14-year-old girl in Farnham Royal, a crime for which he pleaded guilty. He served prison time and was released in December of 1986. 4 months later, Shani Warren was murdered. Less than 2 months after Shani's death, Robertson raped a 17-year-old girl who had missed the last train and was walking home. He was later convicted of that attack after another cold case review. The pattern was hard to ignore. Women and girls alone, sudden violence, and a predator who moved through the same region where Shani's final journey ended. In June of 2021, Robertson was arrested in connection with Shani's murder. In November of that year, he was charged. By then, the case had waited 34 years for a courtroom. At Reading Crown Court in 2022, prosecutors presented the DNA evidence as the cornerstone of the case. Traces linked to Robertson were found on evidence associated with Shani, including the mouth gag, and also in relation to the 1981 attack on the 16-year-old victim. Robertson did not give evidence in his defense. His lawyers suggested alternative explanations, including earlier doubts about suicide and the possibility of another offender. But the jury rejected those arguments. In May of 2022, Donald Robertson was found guilty of the false imprisonment, indecent assault, and murder of Shani Warren. He was also convicted of the kidnap and rape of the 16-year-old girl from 1981. At sentencing, the judge said Robertson had bound and gagged Shani and thrown her into Taplow Lake. He said he was sure Robertson intended her to die. Robertson received a life sentence with a minimum term of 30 years. The verdict finally answered the central question that had followed the case for decades. Shani Warren had been murdered by Donald Robertson. But even with that legal truth, not every detail could be recovered. The exact way Robertson first encountered her remains unknown. Whether he approached her during a car problem, created the appearance of one, or found another opportunity has never been fully established in public records. The missing keys, the final movement from the lay-by to the water, and the precise sequence of Shani's last moments remain part of the darkness around the case. What is known is enough to change how the story should be remembered. This was not a strange suicide. It was not a conspiracy solved through speculation. It was the murder of a young woman by a violent predator, confirmed decades later by forensic evidence. The tragedy is not only that Shani died, but that her family had to wait so long for the truth to be recognized. On Good Friday in 1987, Shani Warren left home to run simple errands. She had grass cuttings in the car, food to buy, and Easter plans ahead. By the next evening, her life had been taken, and her name was tied to one of England's longest-running cold cases. For 35 years, her family carried questions that no family should have to carry. When the answer finally came, it brought justice, but not restoration. Shani was more than the lady in the lake. She was a daughter, a sister, a friend, and a young woman whose ordinary evening became the beginning of a decades-long search for the truth.